Hi, everyone. So we've got Dr. Stephanie Alfonso here with us today to talk about her experiences in the field of neuroscience. So, Dr. Alfonso, I was wondering if you could start us off by just talking a bit about yourself in general and your work in neuroscience.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. So my name is Stephanie Alfonso, and I was raised in a small Mexican border town, Tecate, for those of you who know where that is. A lot of people don't. So I was actually schooled on both sides of the US Mexican border. And so I didn't move to La Jolla or here in San Diego until I was about 18 when I started my undergrad at UCSD. So I was 18 then, and I moved here with my 1-year-old son, Alex. So my work, my graduate thesis work in neuroscience, was centered on the pathophysiological mechanisms that underlie Alzheimer's disease. And as you guys know, that's one of the most prevalent neurodegenerative disorders, along with Parkinson's. So we wanted to kind of find some diagnostic methods that could allow us to find kind of earlier markers of Alzheimer's disease. So specifically for my work, it had already been previously shown that Alzheimer's brains have kind of what we call quote unquote weaker synapses compared to just normal healthy brains. And one way that you can measure this is by measuring the number of excitatory receptors at synapses, right? So that's kind of how I joined the lab, and we were thinking about this and kind of brainstorming. So my first hypothesis was to see if blocking the removal of these postsynaptic receptors, if blocking the removal would actually be able to rescue this synaptic depression. We call it synaptic depression that we see in animal models of Alzheimer's disease. So to actually model Alzheimer's disease in brain, so in a culture, you can have neurons, and what you do is you overexpress amyloid beta, which is a protein that is overexpressed in people with Alzheimer's disease. Then with a method that we used in my lab, because I'm an electrophysiologist, was to record currents from neurons. And so one neuron would be overexpressing A beta and the other one wouldn't. So that was my control cell. And so what I initially found was that these excitatory receptors are preferentially removed from synapses where there's overexpression of A beta, but not from the control cells, right? So then I thought, okay, let me test out this compound that blocks the removal. So I actually tested a proprietary compound from Biogen. So we collaborated with this biotech company. I tested it out and I saw that if you block that, you can block the synaptic depression. So that was one of my first papers. So that was published in 2014 for anyone who's interested in looking that up. Then my second part of my graduate career, I focused on now how a protein called PIC1, that is the one that is we think is removing the receptors, is interacting with yet another receptor called another protein called PKC. And so for that, we obtained these PKC alpha knockout animals, so animals that don't have PKC. And we see that if we try to make them have synaptic depression by overexpressing amyloid beta, they actually don't have it. But then if we reintroduce the PKC alpha with the A beta, they do get the synaptic depression. So again, it's just kind of showing how these very different proteins are interacting, or how A beta leads to maybe abnormal signaling of these two different proteins that are leading to the removal of excitatory receptors, and how maybe if treatments to block this removal could potentially be a treatment with people with Alzheimer's. So that was my other paper. So yeah, that was kind of in a nutshell what I studied as a grad student.
Awesome. Yeah, that's some really interesting research. And I feel like that's also really informative, just all the details you gave. I think that's super cool. So my next question was just about your brain journey is what we call it. So just how you began developing an interest in neuroscience in general and what steps you took to get to where you are now.
Okay. So as an undergrad, my major was biochemistry and cell biology. So I wasn't initially going to be in neuroscience. But as you guys know, your first 2 years of college, you take many courses as electives, and please enjoy them because they're so fun. So, for one of my elective courses, I took a cognitive science course. And what I really liked about this particular course was that it was taught as a research based approach. So, each lecture was a different professor in cognitive science talking about their own research in the lab. And in that way, they would introduce different topics of cognitive science. So it was really neat to see for me to see that, because up until then I didn't know research was kind of like a career path that you could take. Um, so that said, my favorite lecturer was Dr. Andrea Chiba. So she's a professor at UCSD now in the cognitive science department. And after her lecture, so she gave a lecture on amygdala and kind of like fear memory and learning, and how you can manipulate by just simply manipulating the rat's brains or the rat's amygdala. Maybe they can't learn fear, or then you can remove fear, for example. And I thought that was so interesting to relate directly a behavior to what you're doing to the brain. So I actually approached the TA, the teacher's assistant of that course, and I told her how much I enjoyed that lecture. And I was just going on and on. And she goes, "Oh, I know people in that lab. I can put you in contact with them. And they're always looking for research assistants." Again, up until then, I didn't even know you could do that. So I was like, "Yeah, so cool." So she actually did that. And I started doing research pretty early on. I was a freshman, so almost like the summer of my freshman year, I started doing research in Dr. Chiba's lab. And so this was all brain science. So I really started loving kind of neuroscience research.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think I'm going into university next year myself, and I'm really excited to take some electives. And yeah, I think that's really cool that you just like kind of almost stumbled into that and it ended up being something you were so interested in. And I think like really goes to show like you just like, put yourself out there, just telling the TA that you liked the lecture and it grew into this huge thing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So my next question is just about any kind of obstacles, if you faced any, and what they were to getting to where you are now.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. So I was a single 18-year-old mom with a 1-year-old. So definitely having time management skills was like the first thing I had to learn in college. But I did have a family that's very supportive. So I wouldn't say it was an obstacle. It was just more how you're going to manage your time, which is a great skill to have anyway in life. Um, Other challenges that I have even now are maybe imposter syndrome, especially as a woman and minority in science. Sometimes, even though you keep achieving more and more goals that you set for yourself, the higher up you get, the more you look around and people don't look like you or act like you. So that can be a little tough sometimes. But you learn to live with it and kind of you become active in maybe hiring more diverse people around you, or just kind of trying to inspire others. So yeah, I think those were maybe the main two. But
Yeah, I think that's really inspiring, honestly, just seeing that you've made it this far despite those challenges. Yeah, I think that's really amazing. And as like a visible minority myself, I also feel that like I'm a bit worried about that as well, like going higher up in STEM and being worried about the people around you. So yeah, thank you for that. I was also wondering why you chose neuroscience as a career. So I know you talked a bit about stumbling into it when you did your research, but if you could talk about specifically like what it was that captivated you and why you decided to go on with it as a career path.
okay, awesome. Yeah. So number one is because the brain is amazing. So there's that really nice element of mystery that you get, that we all get as neuroscientists, where we just do not know as much about it as we wish we could. So just even doing research, even if I had switched to a lab that wasn't doing neuro, I just couldn't anymore. Because once I saw that there's so many unknowns in the brain, I knew that I wanted to study neuroscience deeper. um, I think for me, the selling point was like the whole concept of just one single organ being responsible for just even how I'm moving my hand. It's the brain, our perception of all the stimuli around us, our thoughts, our actions. To me, was just fascinating. So yeah, that's how I kind of started. Even my grad school application was talking about how the brain is so fascinating to me. So I knew I wanted to study it further. And then again, getting into research early on as an undergrad kind of also shaped me to know that I could do research as a career. If not, I probably wouldn't have known this.
Yeah, and yeah, that I think that the idea that your undergrad is just basically a way for you to start exploring, and I think that that's really cool how you kind of started off in this different place, and now your career is neuroscience, which is really fun. Um, yeah, my next question is what you believe the biggest misconception people have about you or about neuroscience is.
Okay. So about neuroscience, to me, the most common when I'm doing volunteering, for example, and showing high school kids the brain, and sometimes their parents will come in and kind of like hear in onto what I'm saying. The first one is that we like to debunk is to say that people say that we don't use our whole brain. So I'm like, no, we do. We use our whole brain. Other people relate intelligence to the size of the brain. So all that stuff. So those are just common like myths, but you can just tell people no, that's not it. Other ones are mostly that people neglect to see how this field is so interdisciplinary. So, for example, students asking me for advice on how to become neuroscientists, sometimes they'll see me with my biochemistry background for undergrad, for example, and they'll say, oh, well, I don't know bio that much. Do you think I'll get accepted into a neuroscience program? So, the beauty of this field is, again, it's so interdisciplinary. We welcome people from all fields of study. So, for example, some of my classmates were just math majors that didn't never took a biology class before, and so once you get into the field of neuroscience or research, you are going to be trained on how to think and how to come up with very interesting questions. And so you don't really need, for example, just to be a biologist or just a chemist or just this, because you're going to integrate a lot of different types of knowledge into the field of neuroscience. So it's not just one thing. I would say that's a misconception. I think it's many interdisciplinary things put together.
Yeah, awesome. Um, yeah, like I think that's a really cool point because I also feel like people have this misconception of like if you do neuroscience, you have to do med school or something,
Hmm.
or you have to do research. So I think, yeah, that's a really good point to make that it is very broad and there's a lot that you can do in the field. Um, yeah,
Definitely.
so thank you so much for that. My next question is how do you feel your high school experience prepared you for the challenging career you're in now? And what advice would you give to high school students considering neuroscience?
Oh, okay. So lucky for me, I had very good, excellent high school teachers, and really good counselors as well. So for someone who's already thinking, well, definitely you want to go to college and definitely maybe something in neuro or biology or whatever it is that, or a STEM field, start talking to your counselors kind of early on to know that you're taking the appropriate courses. Because what's the point of just taking courses that you're not even are going to help you out for your career? For me, a very formative course was AP biology. And that's when I really, as a high schooler, I knew I wanted to do something in the STEM field or at least in science because I loved biology so much. At that point, I didn't know I was going to be neuroscience, but I definitely knew I loved biology. And so that really helped me at least pick my major, which was biochemistry and cell biology. Another misconception is that you students think that they already have to go into college declaring a major. You don't. And then for students, for example, that have an interest already in neuroscience, just take courses like, for example, physics will help you because neuroscience is a lot of physics, right? So I had to do physics when I was doing electrophysiology. You have to know currents and electricity. So if you take AP physics, AP biology, all that, it's gonna really kind of propel you into your future career in neuroscience. But the first 2 years in college, just enjoy them. You don't have to declare a major. Take all the prerequisites and all the courses that you're supposed to take, but really try to be like a well-rounded person is my advice.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really great advice. I was also wondering, so from my understanding, you are a professor at UC San Diego. So I was wondering, as a professor, what kind of advice would you give to students looking to pursue a graduate education in neuroscience?
Okay. So definitely what I tell my students is you have to do as much research as you can as possible. Okay. So I wasn't just in one lab, I was in like 3 different labs. It was very nice to put my different research projects together as a compilation when you're applying to grad school. So grad schools, again, it doesn't matter if you majored in math or English literature, but if you have the research experience and you can write about it in your personal statement, that's going to look very good in your personal statement. Apply to summer research programs. They're really nice. They pair you up with a professor, they give you a stipend. You learn so much because you're not going to be obviously working directly with the professor. They make you, they pair you up with postdocs or other grad students in the lab, and you're learning from them. So you're really learning the lab dynamics. And if it will tell you really, do I want to do this as a career or not? So I would, yeah, try to get as much experience as you can, and don't be discouraged if, for example, the first lab you go to, you're not that interested in the research. Maybe just do it for a little bit, write up what you learned from it, and then try to find another one. For example, you don't have to stay in one, but definitely try to get as much learning opportunities from doing kind of internships and stuff like that.
Awesome, thank you. That's really insightful. Um, so what would a typical day look like for you as a neuroscience professor?
Okay, so right now, because it's been remote, it's been really nice that I save all the time from commuting. I don't do research anymore in a lab. I just teach and I do education research. So that's more writing on my computer. So in the mornings, mostly it's getting back to student emails and preparing lectures to teach for the day. So that's what my morning looks like. But as of just no matter what career path you take, please try to stay well rounded and have a normal work life balance. Especially with me, I have a son, so I have to take care of him too. So I take workouts and food breaks in the middle of the day to stay sane. And I also, in my leisure time, I like to read novels, something that has nothing to do with science, just to stay a little bit like grounded. So yeah, that's mostly my life now. Now that we're gonna reopen campuses, then now I'll have to commute to campus. So maybe my breaks will be cut down a little bit. But
That sounds really nice, just having those breaks. Um, yeah,
definitely.
so I also heard that you worked for a neuroscience outreach program at UC San Diego. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about what that looks like and why you believe that those kind of initiatives are important.
Okay, yes, definitely. So I actually started as a volunteer for that program when I was an undergrad, and it's led by grad students at UCSD. So it was even before I was a grad student. It's all these neuroscience graduate students, and the major mission of this program is to bring kind of educational materials, which for us are brains. So we would actually bring sheep specimens, so live brains. Well, not live brains, but brains that are still, in preservative to kids. And so we can show them all the neuroanatomical parts of the brain, how they work. Now we're getting a little bit more fancy with our approaches. So now that we can actually even bring recording electrodes and you can hear neuronal spiking in, say, a grasshopper leg. So it's this, it's these, they're called a small company called Backyard Brains that make these little teaching modules for kids. But again, so the main approach is not just to teach people about the brain. Obviously, we love doing that, but it's mostly in areas here in San Diego where there's lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So to me, why that's important is because I had very good mentors and role models. Like my parents are educated, but I can see how it's very important. That was very important for me for my career. And so when you see kids that don't have any role models that, for example, look like them, or they live in an area where no one went to college, or maybe education is not the primary goal, then they love these events. So that was mainly why I kept doing it throughout all these years. Then when I became a grad student, I actually led the program for a while. So we would always have committees. So again, it was a student led organization. And then we also have events that are not just in schools; they're just like county-wide. And those are awesome because now the parents show up, and the parents you see are as curious as the kids to know of how the brain works. So that's kind of nice. And so, just in general, I think we should all, as a society, we should give major importance to just public scientific literacy. You can see as an example now with the whole pandemic, just people not knowing science is can hurt us as human beings. So improving public scientific literacy is one of my major goals, I think, as a neuroscientist. So I will be continue to be active in this field as much as I can.
That's amazing, and that's really inspiring. That program sounds so fun. And yeah, that's super cool. And I think that the fact that you have that kind of goal that's linked to your field, but not specifically just like research focused is really interesting. And I think that it kind of shows that there are different kind of diverse parts of being in a neuroscience field. It's not just about research or about teaching, it's about more than that. So thank you so much for answering all those questions and doing this with us today. I think that a lot of your experience is going to be really helpful to people out there. A lot of people here are interested in neuroscience. If you're on the Simply Neuroscience YouTube channel, you're already obviously interested in neuroscience. So I
Mhm.
hope you guys really enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.